Greetings to all the beautiful people out there in digital world, and welcome back to another episode of Spliced In Later. A bit earlier than usual, but it is time for another movie review, and it is the first of two. So in order to fit them in both this week, because the end of my week is absolutely chock-a-block, you get an episode today, and then be sure to tune back in tomorrow, or just come back later, because who knows when you're listening to this, my next episode may already be up, to have a look at that one too. This review today is a very exciting one, is a very long anticipated one. If you are a regular listener to this channel, to this podcast, you know that it's a long time coming for pretty much so much expectations, delays, setting myself up to expect one thing and getting another. We are finally going to talk today about the new James Bond film, No Time to Die, the 25th film in the James Bond franchise, the 25th official film, and the last to feature Daniel Craig as James Bond. A bit of housekeeping for you if you are new to this episode, though, to understand why this is so long time coming and so hotly anticipated. When I was starting my podcast originally, we started up in the back end of 2019 when there was no COVID-19 pandemic, with the expectation that nothing would ever change and movies would be coming out frequently and I was going to be able to review them. We started off strong, and then we went into 2020, and then things went a little off the rails. But No Time to Die was, in my opinion, the first big budget blockbuster film, big summer blockbuster, however you want to look at it. It was the first casualty of the COVID-19 pandemic. It was supposed to come out in April 2020, and that's after it had already been delayed from 2019 due to a changing of the guard, where Danny Boyle was supposed to direct the film, and then he left. I remember when they first announced it, they said James Bond No Time to Die has been pushed to October 2020 because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I remember thinking, what even is that? Here in Australia, we don't have COVID. That's not a bit, that's like, what is that? That's a poor excuse. I'm very upset about that. But from there, it was just a landslide. After No Time to Die, it was Black Widow, it was Jungle Cruise, it was Top Gun Maverick, it was Ghostbusters Afterlife. 2020 films just fell by the wayside, but No Time to Die was the official first one to kick it off, in my opinion. But then foolishly, I assumed that just because it had been delayed once, it wouldn't be delayed again. So with an October release date in mind, one of my regular show episodes on this show was every month. A monthly, I would look into James Bond. I would specifically pick out a James Bond actor: Sean Connery, George Lazenby, Roger Moore, Timothy Dalton, Pierce Brosnan, and Daniel Craig, and I would analyze their tenure as Bond and what their films were like, what the atmosphere of the world around them was when they made these films, 60s, 70s, 80s, etc., how the world has changed, how Bond has changed with it, how some films have aged well, others have aged poorly, with the ultimate goal being that my last episode was going to be about Daniel Craig in time for the No Time to Die release. And then lo and behold, we got to October. The pandemic was still a thing. Vaccinations hadn't hit off yet, so I got delayed again. So my monthly series of episodes went nowhere, even with all that build-up. So this week has been very anxious. I have not even really addressed that No Time to Die is coming. I have not focused on it too much because it's still subject to delays. Depending where you are in the world, you may not even be able to see it yet. You may still be unable to get to the cinemas to see it, and this is a theater-exclusive film. There are no ways to see it legally through streaming services like some of the other movies have opted for this year. So if you haven't seen No Time to Die and you're listening to this episode, I can only assume that you don't care about spoilers, but I will of course try very hard to not spoil anything. My advice would be, if you haven't seen the film, don't listen to this episode, which is probably the wrong thing to say when I want listeners, but don't listen to this episode, don't read any of the reviews online, go and watch the movie for yourself, make up your own opinion, and then go and see what other people think about it and compare it to your own notes. Don't let anyone else tell you to think or say or do a certain thing, even though that's what I'm about to do, I suppose. Everybody has to come up with their own opinions. Never go, I hear that's bad, and even though I want to see it, I'm not going to because someone told me it's bad. Make up your own mind. If you don't want to risk your money on it, then wait till it comes out on a streaming service or is available for free somewhere to watch. But at the end of the day, don't make a decision about anything until you've seen it for yourself. So without further ado, because this has been a long time coming, what do I think of No Time to Die? I liked it. I didn't love it. I thought it was pretty good, but not a fantastic film. I think it's serviceable in some areas. It's very good in other more prominent, important areas, and it absolutely falls on its face in one particular bit, which we will get into. But I have to say in advance, it is entirely possible, based on all the backkeeping I just told you, that I have built this movie up so much in my mind, having had to wait for it for nearly 2 years, that it may have been set to a bar that it couldn't reach. I don't think so. I tend to go into movies with very open mind. It's very easy to please me. I'm notorious for liking movies that people don't like. I'm notorious for loving films that people think are absolute trash. It's very hard for me to criticize something, for me to be angry with something. It's very hard for me to be disappointed in something, because at the end of the day, I just appreciate film. I appreciate what movies offer to people, which is just anywhere between 90 minutes to, these days we're going on 180 minutes, but just some time to escape your life and just appreciate a story being told. And for the most part, this is a very competent, very well executed, engaging movie with great characters and a great story. But at the same time, I do notice that when I was watching it, I was going, this isn't ringing true for me, and I can't just argue that away to just, it's me overhyping the movie. There are certain bits which ring true with other bits that I haven't liked in the previous film, Spectre, in terms of where they were going with Craig's Bond and all of that stuff. So we'll get into that. Right off the bat though, very well directed, very well acted, very engaging, action-packed, and definitely worth seeing. It's on my top 10, somewhere in the middle. It's just not up there with the really good Craig Bond films of Casino Royale and Skyfall. A very brief plot point for you if you don't know. No Time to Die does the very unique thing for a Daniel Craig universe, is that it continues on the story of the previous James Bond film Spectre, and also all the loose ends that have been building in his other films, Casino Royale, Quantum of Solace, and Skyfall. At the end of Spectre, James Bond had left MI6. He had gone off with his then girlfriend Madeleine Swann, played by Léa Seydoux. They had found kindred spirits in each other based on their upbringing, their relationship to the villain of that movie, Blofeld, played by Christoph Waltz, and they had decided to leave it all behind and go off together. The movie basically opens by taking that relationship and absolutely tearing it apart, thereby putting Bond in a collision course with not just Madeleine Swann, but also MI6, CIA, and the mysterious villain. Basically what's going on is there is this weapon that was created by a scientist. This scientist is now the hot potato that everybody wants. MI6 wants him back. They originally had him, but he was stolen from them. The CIA wants to get him, but they're not working in conjunction with MI6. The evil organization Spectre is also after him for their own nefarious purposes. And then the villain of the film, played by Ramy Malek, Lucifer Safin, as he's called, sounds very much like Lucifer. He's also after him for another completely unrelated plot point. Bond is pulled at from all sides. Basically, he's out. He doesn't want to be involved, but he gets pulled in because of its connection to Madeleine Swann and to Blofeld and Spectre and all this unfinished business that he knows he needs to deal with if he ever is going to have peace or get over all the terrible shit that's happened to him over the course of the 5 films. We then have basically non-stop action, plot twists, weaving and waving between who's working for who's sided with who's the real villain of the plot. Is it Ramy Malek Safin, Christoph Waltz's Blofeld? He could be involved as well. He seems to be pulling things from behind the scenes in a sort of Hannibal Lecter style essence. And what about Madeleine Swann? What is going on there? Does Bond still love her? Does she still love him? Was she ever truly in love with him? Can they make it work in this situation of just spies and secret agents and chemical warfare? And can Bond ever truly let go of being the Secret Service agent 007 that he was, or will it follow him for the rest of his life? That's basically it. To get too much more into it would alleviate the mystery of the film, because this is first and foremost a mystery film. You get your basic setup of the scientist and the chemical weapon, and then you yourself have to figure out how it relates to M and MI6 and Felix Leiter and the CIA and Safin and Blofeld and Madeleine Swann and all of that going on, and how Bond is going to react and survive to everything that's going to go on. Now, what I liked about the movie is that it is a very exciting James Bond film that stays true to what has been established with the modern take on Bond ever since 2006, where they brought in the idea that Bond was not just some invincible secret agent who could do no wrong, and he was able to woo every woman he could find and defeat every villain he went through. This was a Bond that if you punched him in the face, he would bleed. If you kicked him down, he would take a few minutes to get back up. And if he did put his trust in anyone and that trust was violated, he would become the vengeful angel. He would never trust again. He's been classified as the grumpy Bond and the grumpy Bond era, and I like that very much. And it's also embraced the more realistic tone of espionage and spy work in the modern day. So gone were the megalomaniac space stations in the sky that are going to use the sun to vaporize a country, or some other thing involving a North Korean spy that manages to reinvent themselves as a British aristocrat. It's just basic secret evil organizations that just want to take everyday items like chemicals and snipers and all of that stuff and take out certain institutes of power for some other nefarious end. But it was always very personal. The villains that Bond came across most of the time were very relevant to who he was as a person, to the organization, to his relationship with the old M, Judi Dench, to mirror reflections on what he could be if he went too far to the dark side, if he had been born to evil agents instead of good agents. Very, very, very powerful, impressive stuff. And that basically is what continues on with here, and it has a very final sense to it. Spectre was pretty much made to be Daniel Craig's final film. I don't know why he decided to do another. I can only assume MGM came up to his house with a truckload of money, and he went, okay, I'll do one more. But this one is definitively the end to Daniel Craig's Bond story, or at least his tenure as it. It very much takes all the loose threads that have gone before it and go, all right, we'll tie it up as best we can to a point where it is very hard for me to figure how they could continue on with Daniel Craig's Bond story. If they did another movie with Craig in the role, continuing on the themes and stories of the previous films, I don't know how they could do it, and I don't know what stories are left to tell. There's a very sense of finality to it, which is a very satisfying thing for sure. What that boils down to is Daniel Craig's portrayal as Bond. He's been considered the best Bond of all time, and that may be the case. This film really establishes his commitment to the character arc of his James Bond that has evolved over the past, I have to say, I think it's been 16 years. Casino Royale came out in 2006. He started that movie as an arrogant, closed off, unable to form any sort of relationship to anyone around him, hurt in all these different ways, really not much of a team player, unable to think more about what was in it for him personally and what he had to do with things going on. But over the course of the 16 years, he has grown as much as he can in the environment that he has. He was a loner by this film, and from the other films, he's established a sort of family in Ralph Fiennes' M, Naomi Harris's Moneypenny, Ben Whishaw's Q, and Rory Kinnear's Bill Tanner. There's a sense of camaraderie and reliance on each other that he never could have had in the past. After being pretty much betrayed and shocked by Vesper Lynd in Casino Royale, it has been a long journey for him to not only get over that betrayal, but allow himself to open up to the possibility of another romance, of finding somebody who can replace that connection he had, to find someone that he can trust will not betray him in a way that Vesper did, which is the big conflict and drive here of what's going on with him and Madeline Spont. He's very quick to go, I'm going to cast her aside like I did Vesper because I feel like she's wronged me, but he has that more of a connection with her that he doesn't let just sink back into his old ways. He's world weary. He feels like he's put in his time. He just wants to go off and do his own thing, but when his friends pull him back in, he doesn't hesitate to help the people he believes need him, that sort of thing. He's a bit more jovial. He has a few more quips in this film that he's not used to. What's interesting about the Craig films is they started off very grounded and real, but over time they have allowed themselves to fall into the formula or rhythm of the older Bond films in terms of side characters and villainous plots and shaken not stirred and names Bond, James Bond, all that stuff. But it's never got too far the other way that it got into ludicrous for Bond himself and the Bond world that he is in with his MI6 family. I will miss Daniel Craig as Bond. I think he really made an impact, especially with all the naysayers in the beginning who didn't like him because he was too blonde and too short, or whatever all the reasons were there. But he does a memorable portrayal in here, a finality portrayal of Bond, and I enjoyed it very much. As did I enjoy, of course, all of his returning sidekicks. Mostly everybody here gets their moment to shine in the film, and they establish why they're relevant in the Bond world. Ralph finds as M that relationship between him and Bond that is trustworthy but also skeptical of one another. They're constantly shouting at each other, but there is a mutual respect. Q is without a doubt Bond's best friend. He acts exasperated with him all the time, but he's always there for him when he needs him, and he's again got the gadgets, and he's more involved in the final showdown than he's ever been before. Even Bill Tanner, who for most parts has just stood around with M and gone, "Oop, Bond's at it again." He even gets his own little scene with Bond where they have a discussion with one another, which is more than he's got in the past. Then, of course, there's Jeffrey Wright's Felix Leiter, the CIA, the man who basically sets everything in motion for Bond to begin his mission here. I love their relationship in here between Daniel Craig and Jeffrey Wright. They play as two cut from the same coin. They have a very strong admiration and respect for one another, a sense of brotherly bond, which I can only guess has been built up in things we haven't seen before, which is a little frustrating, because Leiter was in the first couple of Craig films and then he disappeared completely. But this one comes back as if he never left, which is nice. But I would have liked to have seen some more of those adventures and wacky shenanigans that I got up into during these unseen adventures. But he was still great. I will say of all the returning characters, the family of Bond, Moneypenny gets the short change in this one. Naomi Harris is great as Eve, and I've always enjoyed that they've revamped her up for the modern age, so she's not just M's secretary that just makes sexual puns with Bond for a scene in the movie and then moves on. She's been more involved in adventures since Skyfall, but I did notice in this film she doesn't really do much apart from run around after everybody else and go, "Oh no, uh-oh." I would have liked to give her at least one scene where she does something cool or defines her relationship with Bond, but we don't really get that. But this movie is stuffed with lots of characters, both old and new, so unfortunately she's one of the casualties there. What else is great about this film, aside from the character acting and the great plot and the finality to Craig's story, is the action. I've mentioned before that as much as I like the Marvel films, you can tell very much watching them that they were all shot on green screens. James Bond, Mission Impossible, there's probably only a few films now that go out to proper locations and take the time to get stuntmen and actually do the stunts in location with real life things. And there's a sense of reality and belief when you see something like that on screen. You can tell they did that in real life. They did have someone take a motorbike and jump it 3 stories up across this beach and land somewhere else. They did have someone smash a car and roll it over and over and over again. It looks great. The sweeping shots in here are incredible. The mood and atmosphere, intensity, depending on the set piece that you're watching and where Bond is taking on a particular villain or action piece. There's a scene in the woods, which could be straight out of a horror film, essentially, from the way Bond is walking through the fog trying to figure out who is around him trying to kill him. It never gets too over the top. Again, it stays grounded in realism, but it just looks incredible to watch, and hats off for taking that approach rather than falling into the general green screen approach that has been done and probably will be done from this time onwards. Now we get into the things that stop it from being a great movie, which is there is a sense of overstuffedness in terms of all the extra characters they throw in here and the running time. This movie is almost 3 hours long, and it feels it. It has a lot of pacing issues, especially in the middle. You do start to realize about an hour and a half, 2 hours in, you're going, okay, I'm still not exactly sure what the overall point is in terms of where Bond is heading or what's going on. I'm not sure exactly who the villain is. Is it this Ramy Malek villain that we keep getting hinted to? Is it Blofeld? Is it Spectre? How does this person become involved? Madeline Swan disappears for a good hour before she turns back up again. So there's a lot of stuff where you think you could cut this out or trim this down to just make it a bit more engaging. Our side characters, as I said, they suffer from the overstuffedness. I have to address that Lashana Lynch is in here as a new character called Nomi, who is the new 007, which of course makes sense. Bond retired. They've only got a select number of 00s that they can use. Someone's going to get the 007. When she was cast as it was announced she's the new 007, the internet, the world reacted in the way you would expect, childishly and stupidly. That's all her character became, was she's a woman. She's a woman of minority. She's taken Bond's 007. 007 number only belongs to Bond, and Bond can only be a man. Frustrating enough, but that's just the world we live in, with a bunch of children who are complaining about their James Bond. Who cares? Who gives a shit? If it's relevant to the story, do it. And I do think it was relevant to the story to show that MI6 moves on after Bond. MI6 does not stand on Bond's shoulders, and if he goes, it collapses. They are an institute that can keep going when he decides to pack it in and quit. The problem is that aside from having the 007 thing, she doesn't get to do much. There's this nice back and forth between Bond when he's brought back into the fray. They're obviously trying to one-up each other in terms of their snarkiness to prove that they're the better 007. But she suffers from my usual phrasing of tell, don't show, where often she or other characters will tell you how cool she is, how badass she is, but she doesn't get to showcase it. There's a lot of time where it says, you go do this, and then she disappears from the film, and then she comes back and says, I did it. Or she goes to do something, but then Bond comes and does it, and then she shows up and goes, I was going to do that, but that's okay. She does get to participate in the final battle, where she gets to do her most badass thing in the whole film, and I hate it. I don't like it, because she murders someone for being racist. Now, Bond has done it in the past when he's faced off against the big bad villains. He's killed them in a variety of violent ways, but normally they were trying to kill him or had just tried to end the world, and it was a life or death situation. The person that she kills in this film, he did not have a gun, he did not have a weapon. All he did was say a racist thing against her. Now, I'm not saying being racist is good. By all means, if someone's racist to you, punch them in the fucking face. Kick them in the balls. I don't care. But it's probably not acceptable to violently murder them in the most horrific way while saying a little quip to go, haha, how cool am I? At least give him a gun, so when she does kill him, it doesn't feel a little, oh my god, Jesus Christ, my god. But again, that might be me nitpicking, I'm not sure. It took me out of the movie. Our main issue with the film, and I've been avoiding talking about it because it is a huge issue, is our villain, Ramy Malek's Safin. Now, this might be attributed to 2 years of build-up because I love Ramy Malek as an actor. I loved him as Freddie Mercury in Bohemian Rhapsody, and he's great in Mr. Robot as well. And when he was announced as a Bond villain, I went, that sounds perfect. Ramy Malek would do great as one of those creepy Javier Bardem type villains. And I was hoping for a villain that was better than what we got with Christoph Waltz's Blofeld. Let's unpack it. When Javier Bardem was in Skyfall as Silva, it took a while for him to show up in the movie. I think it was about 50 minutes before he properly showed up. They were building up the menace of this unknown guy who was after Judi Dench and Daniel Craig. It took a while to show up, but when he did, he had a wonderfully brilliant opening scene where he had a big monologue where he walked from one end to a room of another and told this terrifying story that immediately established who he was as a villain, his scariness, his wild cardness, his tenseness, all of that there, which made you go, right, this is the villain of the film. What's more importantly, after he did that, he was never not on screen. He was constantly facing off with Bond or on the run from Bond or having quips with Judi Dench or being menacing, but once he was in, he never left, and his menace did not stop until he was finally beaten by the end of the film. Spectre took that approach even longer. I believe it was nearly an hour and a half before Christoph Waltz showed up in the film, and they did the same thing. They built up his villainous, but it was a lot more messy. They said, this villain, he's responsible for everything that's ever happened before, so he's even worse than Silva, because look, he did this. Then Christoph Waltz shows up. He is menacing in a way, but in this sense, they rely on him going, he is Blofeld. Blofeld is the arch enemy of Bond from the old films. So if we say his name is Blofeld, you have to go, okay, he is the worst villain of all time, but he never proves it. He does a few things here and there, but then he disappears from the film and he comes back and he has a few snarky comments. But apart from going, oh, it's Blofeld, you know he's the worst, he never really proves it. And then you have this film, Ramy Malek. Safin doesn't properly show up until over 2 hours into the film, apart from 2 isolated scenes. He shows up at the start of the movie, and he shows up about an hour and 20 minutes in for a scene with Madeline Swan. And in both of those scenes, you don't know his name, you don't know who he is, you don't know his drive, anything like that. Over the 2 hours, you get told who he is and what he's doing and his motivational goals. And it is interesting to a point. His motivations are more primed against Spectre and Blofeld more in terms of how he's been wronged in the past and what he wants to do. So it's an intriguing direction they go in. But then somewhere along the way, his villainous plot turns into the megalomania of the 80s, where he just wants to kill a bunch of people because I'm the villain and that's what I'm going to do. And his only character traits once he shows up is that I speak in a funny accent, I've got scarring on my face, and I'm sinister. But he doesn't have the personal connection to Bond in the way that Silver did, or even Blofeld's Christoph Waltz, whatever that was in the previous film. He's just the villain that he must defeat to get to the end of the movie. And for Daniel Craig's final film, the final villain that he will face, Safin doesn't fit it. He's not strong enough to hold that. I spent the whole movie going, why is he doing this? Why does he want to kill everybody? What's the motivation here? I understood his motivation before. I don't get it now. In this regard, I would say, yeah, okay, I wasn't a big fan of Christoph Waltz's Blofeld in the last film, but if you are going to have a final villain to face off against Bond in Daniel Craig's final film, and you don't care really to establish a villain, just bring Blofeld back and have it be Bond versus Blofeld. At least you would have had that established character drama from the previous film to carry into this. When Bond was facing off with Safin and he was talking to him, I did not sense that there was any sort of respect or understanding or venomous attitude towards one another. It was just they had collided because thing. And that was really disappointing to a point where it took several notches off the film for me. Because a Bond film is elevated by two things. One, how great the Bond is in this film, if he's portrayed well, his motivation, his story, and how memorable the villain is, whether he's memorable for being intense and menacing and insane, or over-the-top ludicrousness as the 80s Hugo Drax or Max Zorin from Christopher Walken. They may not be the greatest villains, but what they were doing and how they portrayed themselves was memorable. Ramy Malek is just meh. He's just there. We don't know enough about him to connect with him. We don't see enough of him to be scared of him. And when he is on screen, he does not do anything that is going to stay in my mind as I will remember Lucifer Safin. I won't. I will forget about him. So it's that unfortunate thing with the villain and the pacing and the mess with the additional side characters that they threw in that really stopped this from being a great film. But aside from that, it is still a great time. It is still a solid end to Craig's run as Bond, specifically through Daniel Craig's portrayal in this film. The great direction from the director, the great action scenes, the great mystery that could just benefit from trimming out certain bits here and there. And that sense of family and camaraderie that has been built up in previous films between Bond and M, Q, Tanner, Felix, even Moneypenny for the little bit that she is in here. And it does feel like it's a sense of finality that I did not expect, but I can understand now that it's Daniel Craig's final film in the role. After this, controversial, I don't think we need any more James Bond films. 25 is enough. I know they're going to make another one because they never stop. Cash cows like Marvel. Marvel could have finished after Endgame, and I would be okay with that. It's nice that they're still doing stuff, but when you have a definitive ending, leave it alone. Bond 25 films, I really cannot see in my mind where they're going to go from here. I don't know. They cannot really continue the story of Craig's Bond. They'll have to just reboot it like they've done many times before and just do another Bond adventure. But I don't know if it will have the same emotional resonance to go from No Time to Die into just a standard Bond adventure. I don't feel like we really need a Bond 26. I don't feel like we need more adventures. We've got plenty. We've got our own. If we've got an ending of sorts, let's just leave it alone. That being said, I will be back for you in a couple years probably to review Bond 26. But there you are. Thank you all for listening. I hope you've enjoyed. Probably one of my more intense reviews, probably more layered than normal. It's gone a bit longer than expected. But as I said, this was the first casualty of the COVID-19 pandemic. So it's nice to have finally been able to see it. It was a long movie, so it deserves a long review. Overall, I give it a 8 out of 10. Pretty great stuff. It's just a shame that in certain bits that knock down the notches, it's very strong bits that take me out of the movie or frustrate me, which has stopped it from getting any higher than that. Process that, enjoy it, and I will be back tomorrow to give you another movie review. If you can see this film, go see it. I understand most people can't, but when you can see the film, go see it. It's definitely worth it. Until then, thank you very much for listening. I will speak to you all again very, very soon for another movie review. But as always, I love and appreciate you. Stay safe. You've been spliced in later. Adios, muchachos. I'll catch you next time.